Hey HG 101 fans, I want you to know that we're crowdfunding a brand new, gorgeously printed hardcover book covering 101 weird, obscure, historically important, and just plain cool Japanese video games. It's going to be called Hardcore Gaming 101 Presents Japanese Video Game Obscurities, but we can only put it out with your pledge. So check out hardcoregaming101.net. The link should be pretty much close to the top of the page. Japanese Video Game Obscurities. If we get to do this, it's going to be our best looking book yet, and it's one of those books that it'll be about stuff you've probably never heard of. In fact, I can almost guarantee you won't have heard of almost all of it. So give a hoot, fund our book, $15 for the PDF, $20 plus shipping for the hardcover. Do it!
Hello and welcome to episode 86 of HardcoreGaming101.net's top 47,858 games of all time podcast, where we objectively, definitively, and scientifically rank the games you nominate. My name is Carl, and when I strapped the jetpack to my possum, all I got was a very large mess and a strongly worded letter. My panelists today are...
I'm Bobinator.
The Gunholt.
And I'm Maple.
And on this podcast, we have 3 rules. Rule number 1, all rankings are final, official, and scientifically accurate. Rule number 2, you can nominate one game via 5-star review on iTunes or Stitcher. We've stopped accepting nominations via Twitter for the foreseeable future. And rule number 3, you can nominate games that have already been nominated, but don't nominate games we've already ranked. You can see the master list for yourself. Check it out on bit.ly/47kgames.
Rocket Knight.
Yes, that's right. We're talking about Rocket Knight Adventures. It was nominated to us by Truckface on Stitcher, who has a great name.
I love everything about this guy. I just want to get that right off the bat. His name is Truckface, and he nominated Rocket Knight Adventures, so I love everything about this guy so far.
Well, don't forget about Neon Guide on iTunes UK, also nominated Rocket Knight. So this is crazy. We've had 2 separate people nominate Rocket Knight Adventures with their one game. They had one chance, and they both went for Rocket Knight.
Because they're smart people.
It was developed by Konami, it was published by Konami, and it was released for the best console ever made, the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis if you're in America. It was released first on October 6, 1993 in Japan. So kind of at just after the midpoint of the Mega Drive. This is when the games were getting really good.
Like, just as a point of comparison, this game is basically contemporary with Gunstar Heroes, and while I think Gunstar Heroes is maybe a little bit more famous, partly because it's just so much crazier, I think this game more than manages to hold its own in that regard. It is a very solid, very well-made game that does a lot of stuff and does it all very well.
Okay, well, someone let's summarize this game real quick.
I mean, it's Rocket Knight Adventure. There's your whole summary. You play as a Rocket Knight and you're on an adventure. It's a 2D platformer action game, which is basically wall-to-wall set pieces of stuff, and it constantly throws stuff at you. And you're a possum, right? Like, Rocket Knight is a possum?
Yes. I believe a European possum, to be precise.
He does wear European-style armor, but that's not out of a place in a Japanese game to just give people European-style knight armor because it looks cool. But he has a rocket pack. His name is Sparkster, which kind of sounds like a dangerous name if you're like, if you're wearing like an explosive rocket pack is to be called like Sparkster. But he has a sword, which inexplicably just shoots.
Actually, this one's not inexplicable. If you look closely, it's actually plugged in by a hose or something to his rocket pack.
I mean, if anything, it makes more sense than the sword beam in Zelda, which is magic, so I don't have to explain crap, I guess. I don't know.
I really dig this game's setting. It's like half fantasy, except there are robots and cars and apparently space travel, and they don't really explain how that works, but I think it's super cool, and I would totally play an RPG that was like that.
Sega and video game companies, and why I say Sega is because they did like a bunch of games like the Shining Force games and stuff that have this similar sort of everything punk world feel, I guess. Like, it's just, there are knights, but some of them have guns, and there's rockets and cars and blimps.
And space travel.
Sega was really good in the 80s and 90s about stuff on all consoles, giving you just about everything you could possibly want.
And this is a Konami one. Specifically, this Rocket Knight is exclusive to the Sega Mega Drive Genesis. There are like 3 other games. They're not as good, but they're all over the place, right? There's another Genesis game. There's a SNES game or 2. There's a reboot reboot. It exists. Please don't play it. We're talking about this one.
Freedom Planet is the best Rocket Knight Adventure sequel.
That's fair. Like, the thing that gets me is that they had way forward work on a sequel to the Silent Hill games, and at the same time they gave Climax, who were working on the Silent Hill games at the time, this one. So it always sounds to me like somewhere there was a meeting where some lines got crossed in translation, and suddenly Climax is working on a Rocket Knight game, and the dudes who do the crazy adventure-y set-piece games are doing a horror game. And as I recall, nobody liked either one of them.
I would laugh so hard if there was just someone at like the top of Konami who was shunned by the Rocket Knight Adventures team back in the early 90s, and then in like 2000 or something, they're now like the head of Konami. They're like, I hate Rocket Knight. I hate it so much. I'm gonna ruin this franchise. I'm gonna kill it. I hate it. Because it's really great. It is fantastic. It's almost hard to describe, I would say, how surprisingly good this game is, because it fits together almost perfectly. So your Rocket Knight has one extra ability compared to your average platform character. Faster can charge up his rocket pack. It takes like 0.5, 1 second or so to charge, and then he rockets across the screen like a crazy person, and it's really great. The game makes a huge amount of use for it, and it's very cool.
Yes, he can bounce basically all across the screen.
I think in general, Spokestor is probably one of my favorite kinds of platform heroes in that everything about him relates to an ability you have. I mean, he's a knight, so you've got a sword. He's specifically a rocket knight, so you've got a rocket pack. And even the possum port plays into your ability to hang from platforms.
I love the animation because his eyes look like he's just thinking about something really horrible.
He's a very cute character. You mentioned the animation, and that may actually be just one of my, maybe not my favorite thing, but one of the things that really got me to pay attention to this game in the first place. There is a lot of animation in this game, and all of it is just incredibly fluid and smooth.
What I think's great is that after Sonic came out, a lot of games were trying to chase that cool Toad mascot, and they all failed pretty much entirely.
Sparkster has pretty much like zero Toad, and that's okay.
He doesn't have Toad, but I think he really captures that subtle, underspoken character. Like he looks kind of bored sometimes. He looks kind of whacked out. He's very cartoony. Sometimes there's like tiny little vignettes of like something happens, like he jumps into a cannon or someone runs across the screen and he's like, hey, what's going on there? And it's a lot of it's all unspoken. There's no dialogue in this game really, but you do get like a sense of the character.
I think the fact that instead of edgy 2, they went for more of a traditional anime-esque mix of cuteness and a badassery. That is what makes the character work so well.
Right. I would say that there's sort of a stern determination in his character, but tempered, of course, by aspects of cuteness because he's kind of possum-like, which sort of gives him kind of an affect between Kirby and Mega Man, I'd say. So, this is a very appealing character design that they have.
This kind of feels like maybe a Meta Knight game before anything like him was remotely playable.
Yes, it really does. And honestly, some of the best follow-ups to this game that I could think of are these Meta Knight modes in the later Kirby games. So if you do like those and you've never played this, do check this out.
So this game is, as I said, it's a set-piece game. Your main enemies are pigs in armor, and poor pigs, pigs always get the worst rep in video games. They're almost always evil. And they're all wearing armor, and they're kind of crazy, and they run around, and they got swords, and they constantly are in so many mechanical constructs in this game. There's so many vehicles that they get in. Really wacky machines, and almost all of them are cool to fight against. They start in walkers, they get in giant crabs. Yeah, there's a giant enemy crab in this. Let's all laugh.
This game has some really great boss fights. I want to say it almost feels... I think Gunhart could back me up on this. It feels almost Spectacle Fighter-esque at some points.
Right. Well, it's by the same guy who was in charge of the Contra series at this time, like Contra Alien Wars and Hardcore. So, unsurprisingly, a lot of the same sort of aesthetic ideas come into play in this game. Levels aren't really all that expansive for the most part. They're generally just meant to funnel you from one place to the other, maybe giving you a certain challenge along the way that uses some of your abilities or preparing you for whatever's going to come next.
I found it interesting that, some of the areas actually do let you go vertical. Obviously in most Contra games, you don't go vertical, you just go line. But there's very occasional bits where you actually platform upwards, and you platform upwards and diagonal, and it's not just pure, it's kind of still linear, but not quite the same way. It's a bit odd that there's just sometimes these moments where the game opens up a little bit, and you're like, I guess they felt like doing that.
Also, worth noting is that this is one of those games that actually has a few gameplay change-ups here and there, like an occasional side-scrolling shooter segment, and memorably, a boss fight where you actually pilot your own giant robot in a boxing match.
Right. It's sort of a rock'em sock'em robot robots thing. It's not very deep, but at the same time, they've kind of followed it up in the next game, Rocket Knight Adventures 2, Sparkster, the one for the Genesis. And because they gave you like the ability to block and fire projectiles and stuff, really all that happened was that everything wound up slowing significantly down. It may be more complex, but it certainly wasn't more fun to play.
I want to describe some of the game I think is interesting. If you haven't found out yet, this is not like a typical platformer at all. It is very much in the Contra line where you basically move forward. There's no real exploration. Pretty linear, but something is always happening. You're just going from situation to situation in a straight line. And that's okay, because that's what makes it different and unique.
And you've got a rocket pack.
Oh yeah, that too.
When a lot of these platformers that were copying Sonic had layouts somewhere between the New York subway system and the Winchester Mystery House, like Awesome Possum, Bubsy, like those games were just sprawling and had almost no real coherent design to it. Whereas Rocket Knight Adventures here is very narrow, very focused, and is just almost astoundingly tightly designed. This game is incredibly focused, and it explores its ideas very well, despite exploring so many of them, like the robot boxing and the crazy jetpack mechanics.
Sparkster doesn't have a lot of abilities. He has exactly the amount that he needs, and the rest of the game is really just saying, hey, what if the environment was like this? And what if this was happening? And then you just got to kind of work within those confinements. There are platformer moments, don't get me wrong. Like, I didn't like this level as much because it's one of the few down points in the game where you can die instantly. But in the airship, you've got this bit where you're kind of hanging upside down and you're jumping across like poles and stuff, and then you're swinging on I don't know, like swinging platforms and stuff. Like, there are definitely platformer moments. There's a great moment, which is of course the underground cave crystal lava mirror ground section, which is basically pure platforming, but just really tightly made and looks astoundingly good, which is something I do want to say. This game is, I think, one of those titles, and the Mega Drive has quite a few of them, where in screenshots, it looks pretty good, but when you see it in motion, it's like, they really cranked it. You know, the backgrounds just fly past you. You know, there's so much stuff just happening on screen. Everything is just constantly alive. It's not quite as lively as... Is it like Sonic CD or something? Some of these games where they're like the foreground elements are actually animated. It doesn't have much of that, but you know, it is constantly alive. There's always different clouds moving across. The environments change constantly. Every level in this game, I think is it 8 stages, I think, in total? Every stage is completely different. Completely different tile sets, completely different enemies other than the basic ones. Just everything in this game. It's just 8 levels of just intense game.
Looking at my music list, it goes up to stage 7, but for various reasons, I think it's fair to say that there are basically 8 stages in this game.
Right.
Like, there are a couple ones where like the level splits up like partway through and becomes something completely different.
I'm glad you mentioned the music because they deliver great music too.
It's amazing music. It's some of the best music on the Mega Drive. It's Hiroshi Kobayashi who did the music to some Contra Hardcore, as well as that Castlevania game for the X68000, the one that got released here as Castlevania Chronicles. And if you're familiar with that game's soundtrack, not like the reorchestrated PlayStation soundtrack, if you're familiar with that, you'll definitely recognize his technique in here because it sounds...
I was going to say some of the songs are very traditional European style, like classical stuff and things, and others are a lot more sort of modern and future. Again, like the music styles are a crazy hodgepodge.
Yeah, there's a lot of variety, and it all works incredibly well. This is my Sega Mega Drive benchmarking soundtrack right here. Anyone who says that the Mega Drive cannot make good music needs to listen to the soundtrack immediately. And I was actually going to say, like, the other major musician, I think, of note on here is actually Aki Hata, who still works in the industry in a sense, but as a lyricist only, which is kind of a shame because honestly, her orchestral compositions, like the traditional European tune that shows up partway through the first stage, is just incredibly solid and just so much fun to listen to and really uses the Mega Drive instrumentation to its fullest.
I have seen some jackass say this game isn't very good. I don't know why they said that.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm still mad about that.
I don't know, like, because I felt like this game is a game that speaks for itself. Like, you load this game up, you play it, and you just be like, wow, this is great. You have to have, like, a completely different opinion of games. Like, you would have to look at a game and say, I don't like games that have variety, good music. I don't like cute characters. Got to have lots of violence, blood everywhere. You have to have a very particular idea about what a game should be in order to not like this game, because it is just the greatest thing.
You'd think it was inspired by, like, Shovel Knight or something. You know, a very brilliant brilliant game in its own right, but you'd look at it and you'd think, there's a lot here that's very similar to ideas that were explored in Shovel Knight. And, that was a game that came out 2-3 years ago or so. And this is, oh, holy crap! This game's 25 years old this year.
This game's pretty old, and it's pretty great.
Yes, it's still great. It's aged like a very fine wine.
I guess the only complaint, since, we got to have some complaints, I guess. The only real complaint I would say is that this game's difficulty is kind of a tightrope. This game expects you to do the right thing, and if you don't do the right thing, you take some damage. And if you insist on not doing the right thing just a few more times, you lose a life, or you die.
Now, I will say, though, that in comparison to that fact, there are two things to note. First of all, basically everything has very consistent patterns, so it's usually easy to figure out when you need to do something and why you need to do it in general. It is absolutely possible, I am sure, to do a no-hit, no-death run of this game.
Oh, well, I definitely think that's true. I mean, isn't the hardest difficulty in this game a one-hit KO mode?
Yes, literally one-hit KO, and I think you start with only one life. So, no continues either.
Can't you only get the best ending by beating it on that difficulty as well?
Yeah, well, I was also going to mention that the default difficulties, when they localized it for America, got changed. What was considered the Japanese normal difficulty is now called Children. And in typical Konami fashion, I believe that the very last level of the game is technically locked out to you if you choose it, whereas normal is significantly harder.
Well, okay, because the default difficulty on the Western release, or the version I booted up, was easy. That's the default difficulty. It says easy, which is the sickest joke.
Yes, that's Japanese hard. That is literally Japanese's hard mode.
So they did a Devil May Cry 3.
I do think that it is totally manageable on that difficulty, but if for some reason I just want to charge my jetpack and just keep flying around, it probably won't work. You're probably going to get your ass beat, and it's not the game's fault.
I was going to say, if you just want to fly around in your jetpack like a moron, you may be the sort of person who the sequel on Genesis was actually made for. It is in general definitely nowhere near as good as this. It doesn't really have the same level of polish. It doesn't move as briskly, and the levels are maze-like in a kind of infuriating manner. And while this level, on account of having things like multiple shoot-'em-up stages and actually a minecart segment, it does have its fair share of auto-scrollers. Sparkster, Rocket Knight Adventures 2 has way more of them, and I struggle to recommend it. It is just such a grind to get through.
I mean, this has got to be one of the most polished games on the Mega Drive. It just has to be.
Yes, one of the most polished games ever. Even now, I maintain 25 years later. They don't make them like this now either, really.
We have to move on to ranking. We don't have a choice. We are running out of our time here, so...
Okay, I'm gonna make a crazy bit wise now between Devil May Cry and Sonic 3 and Knuckles.
I didn't think that was crazy. I thought that was kind of like the bare minimum this game should be placed at.
I'm okay with that for sure.
I'd actually think in the top 10.
Oh, you have to put this over Sonic 3 and Knuckles. You absolutely do. Please play this game. Please do it.
So we didn't make this clear because it's obviously not clear to anyone, but Muteki is a tremendously big fan of this game. I think the main argument for this game being placed very high, and it's not just it's really good, is that I genuinely believe that this game has had a massive influence on developers. There's so many indie developers that you can find, especially now, who will say yeah, I played Rocket Knight Adventures. It's really, really great. I loved how it did this, or I took this idea from it. Because it is so polished, it represents this extremely high benchmark.
And it has so many ideas to take. It is every time I see a game, I think, oh, here's the bit that reminds me of Rocket Knight Adventures. And if you played, for example, Sonic Mania, I almost feel like it owes more to Rocket Knight Adventures than it does the old Sonic games in a lot of ways.
I still would say Eden Planet, at least as Lilac, feels more like this than a Sonic game.
Yes, that too. I mean, at the end of the day, a Sonic game is going to be very predictable and really sort of lives or dies in a way on its level structure more than anything. When you try to do something a little bit flashier or more than that, you really need to look closer, I think, at games like this.
I want someone to try and make a compelling argument for putting this above A Link to the Past. I don't know if it can go any higher, but can anyone make a compelling argument for that?
Well, funny, I like Link's Awakening more.
Link to the Past does not have a giant walker robot piloted by an opossum. Link to the Past, don't get me wrong, is also very crucial and fundamental, in a way, game designer's game, the way we think of this. But I feel like Link to the Past at the same time has been bested by its forebears in a way that I feel like this game really hasn't. They do as well as Rocket Knight Adventure sometimes. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that this game is unimpeachable or that there aren't games that are as good as it, but I struggle to consider games that are, in fact, fact, straight up better than this one.
Like, if you said, I want the best action platformer, or whatever you want to call this game, that you can give me, I don't know if I would pick a game other than Rocket Knight. Like, I think that of those games, of that whole genre, I probably wouldn't pick a different game. Like, if you wanted me to represent a single game, I would go, well, this has everything, right? And it has almost no flaws, right? Like, I don't know any.
Like, it's hard for me to think of games that I would recommend before this. There are games I might recommend in tandem, like on the Genesis, I always say Dynamite Headdy, Ristar, and Rocket Knight Adventures are the three most crucial Mega Drive games, especially for people who care about action platforms.
Okay, so I think I will be the voice of reason here and say that I don't think it can go above Super Street Fighter II Turbo on account of it basically codifying pretty much everything about the genre to this day.
I was very much agree. I deliberately said A Link to the Past because I thought the only game up there that this would potentially be able to be argued against was that.
Right. I think that's its biggest problem, is that in a way it really never was able to reach the sort of cultural cachet that it has. We mentioned it before. I think one of the reasons is that all of the follow-ups were varying degrees of disappointing in comparison to it. So it really sort of exists on its own as this one classic game that, between like Konami and the fact that it's one of their few Genesis games, just never got attention, rarely gets re-released.
Do you guys genuinely all want to put it above Link to the Past? Because if you do, that's where it's going. We're going to put it at 9.
Yes.
I'm okay with that.
We have a thing about, highlighting games, about saying, look, this game is really good. Why is it here? Go look at it. And and this is that game. This is the game. If you haven't played this game and, you need to play this game, it belongs in everyone's has played list. This shouldn't be in your to-do. This should be in your done list. And there's no one I wouldn't recommend this game to. And maybe I would recommend it more than A Link to the Past, even in that regard. Like,
you don't need us to tell you that Super Street Fighter 2 is a good game. You don't need us to tell you that Super Mario Bros. 3 is a good game. You don't need us to tell you that Link to the Past is a good game. But this game I feel like it's never gotten the attention in the wider gaming public that it deserves, and that is a real tragedy.
Because this is the best, and we're putting it in. It's going below Super Street Fighter II Turbo and above The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past at number 9.
And I am cool with that.
As cool as a possum in a suit of armor, flying through the air into space.
Godspeed.
Game we're looking at is Panic! It was nominated by @Marek1337, developed by Office One?
Office I, actually.
Office I and Sega AM7, which, when you get to AM7, you're not looking at the best teams, right? Published by Data East in North America and published by Sega in Japan.
Yeah, I guess I could make a guessy reason why Sega didn't want anything to do with this in the US.
The game is high quality when Sega themselves are like, let's not even bother. It was released on the Sega CD, which is where you'll find all of the best games of 1993, and that was the year this game was released, April 23rd, 1993 in Japan. I assume the Western release was the same year. Don't have that one down here, but it is look, let's just be honest. It is barely a game, which is it's not completely surprising. The Sega CD is kind of infamous for being chock-a-block with the most FMV games around. Just watch this movie play and in this tiny little postage stamp in the center of the screen and try and have some fun.
Can I describe the entire game?
If you think you can.
I think I can, because you see a bunch of buttons. You push a button, either something weird happens, or you get more buttons to push. That's the game.
And I gotta say, the CD format really doesn't do any favors, because the animations are all sprite-based, so right there, the CD format is kind of wasted. And second, you have to wait for the game to load these animations.
I'm going to be a bit of a devil's advocate here. I think it's a good concept. I'm not saying Panic itself is good, but I feel like maybe Sega didn't want to bring this to the United States because I feel like it's a bit like its humor kind of localized to Japan. The game plays a lot on like Japanese humor, and I feel that's why it's not as popular here.
I think somebody who worked on this game must have been a Monty Python fan.
Oh, definitely.
The intro itself definitely gives me a British cartoon vibe.
See, that's interesting because if we're saying that this game is like, ooh, it's very Japanese, but the humor itself does not strike me as particularly Japanese. And usually that's a key element of Lost in Translation games is that they're, it's like, oh, we can't understand this because it requires years in the Japanese schooling institutions to be like, oh yeah, no, that's funny because it's this thing with that. This doesn't feel like that. This just feels like someone wrote a lot of nonsensical skits which don't feel like they have some sort of like deeper culturalness to them. They're just like, haha, boobs explode out of his head. Hilarious.
I was wondering how long it would take to get to that.
There isn't much that encapsulates the sort of just random nonsensicalness of this game than that, because it's just like, whoa, what? Huh?
I'm still surprised they left it in the US release and it's only got a teen rating.
Sega did weird things.
Okay, apparently they kept that, but they cut the cigarette machine scene, so that should tell you some other priorities.
That said, I think one of my own low pet peeves with the way the game is designed is the fact that the gags don't really reset very well. The screen just fades to black and the room is back to the way it was at the start. Like, I don't know, I just feel like there was kind of a missed opportunity there of making this feel more like a game. But instead it feels more like you're just activating animated shots until you find the next one.
Well, I think Panic feels like nonsense and it doesn't really have a point, rhyme, or reason. I feel like it fits in with a lot of other CD-based games of that era, like especially PC games. It reminded me of a PC game that I played when I was a kid, The Great Green Mouse Disaster, which is a 1995 PC game. That one, and also a bunch of Humongous Interactive games, and it's like there's a bunch of things to click on the screen, and each one triggers a different animation. And I think like that's the core of Panic. There's a bunch of animations that they fit on CD, and if you click the wrong button, you get one of those, and if you click the right button, you just advance in the game. And like thinking about those other games, it makes sense that this game exists.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I remember owning a lot of edutainment games as a kid that had that exact same feature where you could click stuff and then things would happen that had nothing to do with the actual gameplay. They just played funny little animations for you to watch.
I feel like this would be right at home in a lot of like the multimedia stuff that you see in, I don't know, Windows 3.1. I guess if I could compare it to like one other game, it'd be The Manhole, if anyone remembers that.
Never heard.
No, the game that the Millers made before they made Myst. That's the game.
Okay.
But I think the problem is like there isn't like a overworld. There isn't a connection between the events. There's no framing device other than you're in a computer and you have to fix things or some like very basic framing device, which, because like in most of these games, it's like you have some stupid objective, maybe like, the elephant's lost in the city, go find him. And then you click like a car and it honks at you. And then you click a door and it opens and there's a naked zebra. And that's what these games do, is they're like got some sort of tentative connection between themselves. Whereas Panic it's Panic. You just have to press a button, and then the button is like, okay, well, this is the green button, and it causes your head to explode. That's it. That's the button. And it's like, that's funny for like 10 seconds or like maybe 10 minutes, whether you're that easy to entertain. But Panic doesn't really give you anything to sort of go, I'm making progress, or this is interesting. It's just like,
Actually, I think that's kind of the fundamental problem here in and of itself, is that progressing in the game is the most boring part of it. Like, the fun of the game is seeing all of these weird gags happen, and if you press the correct button, most of the time, the transition happens without a gag. You just vanish and pop into the next area. There are some exceptions where a gag is what causes the transition, but those are few and far between.
So, I want to talk about like the actual game structure, such as it is, for a little bit, because it's not great. This game does have an ending. There is a goal you are trying to achieve, and to do that, you have to hit the exact right sequence of buttons that takes you to the final room and hit the final button. but the game does not keep track of what buttons you've already pressed, and I think that's the deal killer. There is a map, but it's very difficult to actually read, so you know where you're going, what you've already done. So basically, unless you want to map every single button, of which there are hundreds, you just have to basically just guess your way through the game, and I don't enjoy that.
Yeah, it's as a game, I think it's lackluster. As best, I could describe it as a collection of animations to watch on your Sega CD. It's that thing sure happened, and that's about it. I feel like playing the game right, and I use the term right very loosely, is actually the worst way to play it, because if you guess the right button every time on every single screen, you're not going to see any animations, because the button that actually makes you progress just makes the main character disappear from the screen and the screen fades out into the next scene. So if you get the right button, you're not going to see anything.
I think ultimately I find this game frustrating because the assets, the situations, and everything all look like they'd make for a really fun, quirky puzzle adventure game, and it's just buttons you press to make things happen instead.
Yeah.
All of the elements artistically that would make something fun, but the game itself isn't actually fun.
Yeah, it's like they gave a very good direction to the artists who worked on the animations, the drawings, everything.
Without knowing, the sound effects are mostly produced by someone just making the noises with their mouth. I thought that was a funny touch.
It feels like there is some sort of effort here, but the gameplay department is seriously lacking. As Cal said, there's no real theming that ties everything together. It's just a bunch of animations that play when you press random buttons. So I think that's the real problem with this game.
It's actually really weird because this game actually uses a cursor interface instead of any sort of regular D-pad input. So it's so strange that they didn't even, when Sega was obsessed with porting all of their games to the PC, they didn't bother with this one. It's crazy. They should have done it. They would have made $20.
You say that, and I would have to wait. This would have probably been much better on PC with faster loading times.
Faster loading times and the mouse.
There is a PlayStation 2 version. I wonder if the loading times are any better on that. That's only Japanese, so that might be a bit of an issue too.
Well, it's not like there's much text in the game.
So is there much else we can really say about this game?
I don't think I've seen the ending, if there is one, because I've only had a very brief encounter with the game.
Does anyone mind if I spoil it to you?
To me, no, I don't know about our listeners.
You should definitely spoil it because anyone that really likes this game has already played it, or they're just going to watch a video on YouTube, so whatever.
It's basically watching a robot head morph into a Buddha statue, and then you're told mission complete, and you get credits with all of the characters parading by.
Sounds like your average disappointing video game ending from the 90s.
Pretty much, yeah.
So yeah, I can appreciate this game for what it is, but I don't know if what it is exactly what it's trying to do.
I think it's about time to wink this mess.
Alright, it does qualify as a game, so I mean, it beats Crazy Bus.
Okay, so here's something I will say. At least you're not torturing people in a cell, so it's better than Chiller.
True, that's definitely true. It's not glitchy, it works as intended, so I think it beats Sonic 06.
Okay, wow, you're starting low, aren't you?
I think you guys are being way too harsh on this.
Sewer Shark, I think that's a good point.
I think it could go above Sewer Shark. I think it's more entertaining because it's not frustrating.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It gives you at least 30 tries to get through it before it makes you start over.
I would definitely rank it above Sewer Shark. I just thought it was a good starting point.
The thing is about the Windows games is you probably owned a computer that could run those games when those were getting big. Everyone kind of owned a computer by 95, 96, whereas this game required you to own a Mega Drive, then upgrade to buying a Mega CD or a Sega CD, and then for some reason buying this specific game and then loading it up on your television, which a lot of people only had one television. So now you're occupying everyone's TV time with this complete nonsense. But that's not exactly the game's fault. It's kind of daring to make such an effective non-game on a system that is ostensibly a game machine. I like it more than Yoshi.
It's definitely not as repetitive as Star Wars Arcade.
Definitely not as repetitive as Last Battle.
I just realized that both it and Evergrace have sounds produced entirely by someone's mouth.
Can I give it an entirely very objective scientific opinion opinion, I think it would rank above No One Can Stop Mr. Domino.
You know what? I'm okay with that because I get angry when I think No One Can Stop Mr. Domino. I don't want to play it anymore. I'm not going back. You can't make me.
And it doesn't give you Scream or playing Psych Friday the 13th.
Maybe just below Bugs Bunny and Rabbit Rampage. Is that too high?
I think that Gekibo Geshiya Boy, did I say that right? I think that one does sort of bring to the table the random absurdity, nonsense humor, but also kind of packs a game into there. I think Panic maybe does not succeed as well as that one does in terms of managing to be a decent game. Because Panic doesn't care about being a decent game, and I think that's to its detriment.
I think I know somewhere that everybody will be okay with. Below Shaq Fu, above Neverending Nightmares.
Above Shaq Fu.
Cal is just seething with rage at the moment.
Well, I can feel Cal's bloodlust all the way over here.
I guess I'd rather play this than I have No Math I'm a Scream.
Definitely, I agree with that.
But I don't think it should go much higher than that.
I was thinking maybe between Rats and Super OC Pro-Am.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
I think this is better than Rats. Rats is not very interesting. This is a lot more interesting. That's the best thing about this game is that it's interesting. The worst part about it is it's not really more enjoyable than just watching like one skit of like Monty Python.
I think this is about as high as it can go, to be honest.
Yeah, I think if we go any higher, then we're gonna bring it up higher than Cal's blood pressure.
So, between RC Pro and Rats? Alright, so that is Panic at number 229. Play it or don't. Who knows?
Wow, that sure was a scintillating and exciting conversation about video games. And if you want more scintillating and exciting conversations about just one video game, that video game being Peasant's Quest, when was that game released? 1988? It's by Videlectrix.
They went out of business, right?
I had no idea. I only kept up with their, newsletter, and they stopped sending it in the mid-90s, That was a shame.
I stopped getting it when I stopped having a Usenet connection.
But do check it out. It's going to be great. I think Maple is still joining us on that one because she owns all of the Videlectrix merchandise. She has the little fan club sew-on patch that they gave out. Exciting stuff.
I picked out the merchandise off from a trash can.
And we'll see you all there. That's all for this episode of Hardcore Gaming 101's Top Games Podcast. Special thanks goes out to Truckface on Stitcher, Neon Guide on iTunes UK, and at Marek1337 on Twitter. 1337, is that a secret message? For nominating those games, and thanks to those of you we didn't get to yet, we will be getting to you soon. Thanks as well to my lovely co-hosts and co-patriots, our editor and booking agent Jeff Rude, our theme song composer Muteki, our technical assistant, video editor and scriptwriter Bominator, our sound editor The Gunheart, and of course the support and feedback of listeners like you. You can support this podcast by making a small monthly donation at patreon.com/HG101, by subscribing to the HG101 YouTube channel, and by following at GC9X and at HG_101 on Twitter. You can also hang out with us on our Discord at bit.ly/HGDiscord. But most importantly, help us claw our way into the podcasting firmament by getting on iTunes, subscribing to HG101, and giving us a 5-star review. Do it! Or clicking the download link to our next episode will cause your computer to spontaneously puke. Ah! Until next week, keep keeping it real.